Hi there. I'm Dr. David Delgado Shorter from the University of California, Los Angeles, and I'll be talking to you today about the ontological turn toward space justice. See, a few years ago, a group of Indigenous studies scholars were invited by the Berkeley Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Research Center to provide a disciplinary perspective to the SETI project. The UC Berkeley team of SETI, called Breakthrough Listen, represents the most well-funded and geographically expansive search for ET communication in history, drawing from telescopes to scan the entire 1 to 10 gigahertz range. The aims of Breakthrough Listen and the aims of SETI are relevant to Indigenous studies in a way that confounds our normal historical framing of colonialism. Space, conceived of as the final frontier, and space travel as well, have been fantasies built within a temporal framing of the future, and yet they are the newest global commitment to a continuation of colonialism. Dr. Kim Tallbear, Lakota scholar, good friend, and I, we were joined with other Indigenous studies scholars to contribute a working paper and then present it at a meeting at Berkeley. And after a very challenging discussion, which can be read about in our special issue of American Indian Culture and Research Journal, the four of us learned, in conversation with the scientists there, once again, the truth of Karen Casosa's claim, who was interpreting Hawanani K. Trask's indictment, that, quote, settlers cannot be trusted to detect and identify colonial injustice, end quote. The two most consistent questions we fielded were, how can just listening be unethical? And secondly, how could we be colonizing Mars when there are no life forms there? You can read more about the first question in our full essay. But for this group today, I want to address the second, how we might better understand the simple claim from an Indigenous studies perspective that we are colonizing Mars. I cannot help but think of Diego Landavar's 2014 comment, in the world of the West, if we can think of something, we can do it. Today we are thinking of colonizing Mars, but I don't believe we can colonize the moon, the sky, Mars, simply because they're empty. End quote. If scientific communities and their best practices for discerning truth rely solely on an object-oriented epistemology, then space exploration has much to learn from the history of colonialism on Earth. Never speak of colonization in the past tense. Colonialism is actively perpetuated and continues to evolve in new phases. Although some may consider that colonialism only pertains to the colonization of people, and hence we cannot colonize space, my readings in native studies literature, they do not firmly separate humans from other than human life, which would include animals, plants, and the land. As I showed in my essay, The Frontiers of Space Colonization, the European notion of life, it depends on a hierarchical chain of being that was heavily influenced by Christianity and concepts of the soul, as well as continually shifting definitions of intelligence. The Mars rovers can test soil samples. They can determine subterranean topography. They can send high-resolution video and audio recordings back to Earth. So we've moved then from surveillance to penetration. Not having human bodies on that planet merely saves someone the labor of erasure and disappearing that would happen at a later date in colonialism. As Robert J.C. Young, Patrick Wolf, and Michael Taussig, as well as others have shown, the land has always been the goal of the colonizers anyway. So I have little doubt that, to some involved in space exploration, an empty planet saves them the pesky Indian problem. The robotization of massive areas of industry has replaced soldiers with drones and cameras, therefore extending the cyborg manifestation of exploration and dominance. Within the quickly growing literature on beyond the human thinking lies the crux of major disagreements between STEM knowledge-making and many Indigenous knowledge-making practices. If the scholarly world and the best practices for discerning truth rely solely on an object-oriented epistemology, then we disagree on ontological matters about what or who is real and alive. And if we cannot see any common ground on ontology, then we have little hopes of agreeing on axiology, which is how to value and establish moral action. The burgeoning field of multi-speciesism is born from a conjunction between science studies, ethnographic methods, theories of ontology, and Indigenous studies. From that literature, we've learned much about how other societies understand relations beyond the human, meaning with rocks, plants, landscapes, planets, meteorological events, and of course animals. What object-oriented science has considered material reality, small-scale societies, primarily oral peoples, and many indigenous communities, among others, have understood intersubjectively. Put another way, human health and illness are inextricably linked to our relations with the elements, meteorological events, our balance with others, including other than human persons. And some of these intersubjective approaches to health are indeed aboriginal. So the term New Age mislabels many of the ways of knowing that are the opposite of new. So to avoid falling into binary thinking, such as truth versus folklore, bear in mind that many of these same communities do understand categorical differences between sayings, entails, knowledge. They see knowledge as changing over time. Central to these ontological perspectives about the world is the recognition that things might not be things at all. As one particular form of technology, communication structures culture, and it enables humans and others to foster intersubjectivity through their play with signification systems, something I can't explain in 10 minutes, but a few examples may be able to illustrate my point. For the Tlingit people, glaciers have been communicating with Europeans since before Tlingit people have understood glaciers as being able to communicate with humans before Europeans ever arrived. And for the people in Timor, they understand not only trees, but also water and soil as having agency. My work with the Yuame of Northwest Mexico has enabled me to experience firsthand how flowers, animals, and humans are perceived as being able to sustain communication and intersubjective agency with humans. The ontological research rarely claims that all objects have the ability to communicate and relate. Rather, that certain indigenous communities, through their languages, have a perceptual door open that most European-based languages and cultures keep firmly shut. For A. Irving Hollowell in particular, grammatical categories of nouns that are animate rather than inanimate provide Ojibwe people the option to perceive some non-human persons as exercising will, intention, and ability. Such perception enlarges our ability not only to see life differently, but to appreciate the ways that organisms act intelligently. If plants and what many people call nature, which would include rocks, landscapes, groves, rivers, etc., are capable of being alive and intelligent and emotional, then we must collectively rethink what we consider life on other planets and what we consider intelligent life. Not doing so, not attempting to think beyond the human, invites the question of how advanced we ourselves are as a society, and whether we should actually be using our own model as a standard for life off of planet. How can we pursue the next frontier honestly, without examining our own history of societal contact and colonization, one that has led us to completely disregard these other perceptions? And how are we as inhabitants of the planet moving toward new planets ethically if we completely just dismiss the worldviews of humans that we contacted in previous frontiers on Earth? Our working group offered perspectives based on research among indigenous communities and our knowledge of indigenous studies, methods, and theories. In some ways, we wanted to lay out our case in terms that they were likely to be understood. So we compared it to institutional review boards. We explained how our universities require us to prove not simply that our research is unlikely to be harmful, but that we most definitely would mitigate any and all risk of causing harm to our collaborators and subjects. We wanted to convey that the responsibility was on Breakthrough Listen and SETI scientists to clearly state their intentions for contact and how their methods were safe and ethical. The response we received from them was simple. Now, how could we be harmful if we're just listening? But intent is indeed powerful. It's constitutive of how encounters end up playing out. And if DEI doesn't include other people's perceptions and languages and differing ways of knowing, then it would not matter how diverse our teams looked physically. As I often heard in a dear Navajo family's household, how things start are how they will end. And with such a limited notion of life, the scientist at the forefront of search for life on other planets seems well prepared to not discover, but cover over life with the same European ego that still fails to encounter the diversity of life on this planet. Thank you so much.